Thank you for having me here. And also thank you for putting me in this panel. It makes a lot of sense. And as Fiona already said, I'm also going to repeat some stuff from the last 2 days. Sorry for that, but just keep in mind, maybe this is sort of the repetition at the third day, before the final test in the end of the day. So, zombies ate democracy. Please excuse me, I'm a historian, so we are going to start with something a little bit boring, maybe, definitions. Definitions are so important. So let's talk about democracy. Maybe I will drop some other definitions later. But democracy is, like many words we talked about, so often used, and most of the time we don't think about a definition. And there are many definitions about them. No, there are many different forms of democracy, but modern democracy means that power comes from the people. So the people. This means in our cases, in Western democracies, a majority of the people. And in the last century, in 1990, around 1990, and with the end of the Cold War, there was a time where people thought, okay, now it's finished, we won, the West won, democracy has won. Fukushima wrote about the end of history. It's quite funny in retrospective. And it's what really this sort of feeling around the world that now every country will become a democracy. And then something happened. And I brought here a quote by Madeleine Albright from 2018. Just to drop a famous name, but this is something that we see every day in the TV. It is quite depressing. Skepticism about democracy is rampaging at the moment. We see it, we saw it in Austria now with the winning of the far right, but it's not only Austria, as we know. And there's really a rising skepticism of democracy. And just to also show some graphs, because I like graphs, from the Eurostat. Blue is good, yellow and orange not so much. Blue means there is an acceptance of democracy or believing in a democracy, and red not so much. We could talk a lot about this. As you see, Austria is, where is Austria again? Somewhere in the, wait, yes. Still on the side, tending a little bit more to democracy, but with every year, let's say, skepticism is rising again. So what has that to do with zombies? Let's talk a little bit about me and about Arno. Don't see, here's Arno. Together with Arno, our last project was about horror game politics, and we analyzed a sample of 22 horror games, and we're searching as historians of ideas about ideological statements. We were talking about myths inspired by Roland Barthes, who was now mentioned 2 times at this conference, and now the 3rd time. We just took some ideas, not everything he said, but we can talk about this in the questions if you want. But we took the idea of the myth as a political statement, and what was important, what Barthes talked about, it always appears as something natural, and something that is natural is normally not questioned. And we found about, wait, I'm going to show you this first. You don't have to read this, but there were a lot of myths we found in these 22 games. And just to explain it, to find these myths, we developed a method that is quite simple. We analyzed the production of games, the games themselves, and the reception. And what I'm going to show you today is only the second part, so the content analysis. And what we did here is also something very normal, is to analyze the political statements, not only in the narration, not only in the story, but also in the audiovisual aesthetics, so in the graphics and music and sound, and in the game mechanics. And we only talked about myths if we found parts of this myth in all 3 of these levels. And one myth, myth 6/7, is the myth of societal collapse. That was quite common and is especially common in zombie games. Zombie games like this. And as we are historians, I'm talking about older zombie games. I'm talking about The Last of Us 1 and not so much about 2. I will be talking about the first season of Walking Dead, about Left 4 Dead, for those of you who still know these games. Dying Light is quite new. But I will also bring some other examples. But interesting thing is, we could also talk about the big rise of zombie games and of zombies in all sorts of media, is that this is really a very stereotypical genre. It has very strict rules what you show normally. There are some films, there are later some games that try to change this, and this is a part that we already talked about at this conference. You have to know the rules to change them. And the rules are, let's start with the narrative. What do we need for the zombie apocalypse at the beginning? And this is a part that is normally not shown. We need the world as we know it, and democracy and society, state, police, military, firefighters to have broken down. And normally this is not shown. I'm showing one example from The Last of Us, from the intro, where it is shown in a sort of montage at the beginning, and I don't know if you can read it, but it is quite a beautiful quote. With the bureaucrats out of power, we can finally take the necessary steps too. We never learn what they will take the final steps. But this is something very common in most zombie games. And not only, I'm going to talk about zombie games, but if you think of most zombie movies from the last 20 years and graphic novels and so on, there are some similarities. So, the narrative. We have here something's very common. So the first point is, for the whole story to work, we have just to accept that the state was not able to react to a zombie threat. And this is normally not shown because I think it would be quite difficult to show, for example, the US Army to not be able to fight unarmed humans, even if they are really, really aggressive. But this is something that we just have to accept in the beginning, and then sort of, the suspense of disbelief to really immerse ourselves in these games. And also the breakdown of power has to be absolute. This is something quite new. I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but we accept this, and normally we say, yes, zombie narratives have always been this way. No, they haven't. It's only around the end of the 1990s that this specific narrative started and it became really successful. And of course the player, and in most cases, really in most cases, the player is a white man, is a lone survivor. Sometimes, as in The Last of Us, he finds a small group, or in The Walking Dead, there are some groups. But also an interesting fact, these groups are never natural groups or homogenic groups, like a family. A family tries to survive. Or an office group, some people who work together, or a football team. So it's never a group of persons who always can rely on each other. They have to be thrown together. So a motley crew of, I don't know, like in Left 4 Dead, there's a lawyer, there's a redneck, there is the team coach, and so on. So that there's always this sort of, we're working together this moment, what we're not totally, we're never sure, can we really trust these other people? And in most stories also, these groups are breaking at some point. So this is the second point that is really important. The player takes the role of the lone survivor, smaller barrier groups. Yeah, and the most interesting thing for me is, so what is the goal of this game, the goal of the story? It's not, most of the time it's not, we're trying to fight the zombie threat, we're not trying to fight the apocalypse, we're not trying to reconstruct society or rebuild something, we're just trying to survive and taking one step after the other. So core themes in this case are solitude, arbitrariness, and futility also, because every solution you find is only for the next days, the next moments in the game, and then the threat is coming again. One central point of this narrative is also that the zombies are the antagonists. Normally we're killing a lot of zombies, or we're sneaking around a lot of zombies, but they're not enemies in this sense because they're not evil. They are natural threat. They're more like animals. They're trying to eat us, but they're not on a moral or ethical level evil. They're just doing what they're genetically, or most of the time genetically, programmed to do. But there are some enemies. There are evil persons, and these are the others. Also in many zombie narratives, normal case, you're a survivor and you meet finally a group of people. I at least now learned to be really wary at the beginning, because most of the time they are fascists, or they are, like Joshua said yesterday, or they are cult, or funnily enough, there are really a lot of cannibals. I'm not going to stress this point. Joshua did it very good yesterday. But also, so really, they are the worst. And this is something when normally, if you read some papers about zombies, at some point, Thomas Hobbes is quoted because from Hobbes comes this idea, and as Fiona showed it very good in her paper, there is this belief that if there's no control, humans are evil. We will destroy each other. We will take the goods from the other. It's the strong one will survive. And I also don't believe in this. But another point is, and Thomas Hobbes, he shows this because he is arguing for the covenant. So he's arguing for the state. We need a state to defend us against this. And zombie narratives are showing something very different because they are showing it makes no sense. First, the state deceived us. He didn't work. He didn't defend us against this threat. And also, if there are some small communities that we meet in these games, in these movies, in these graphic novels, most of the time they are fascist cults that are cannibals at the same time. So we can only rely on ourselves. So it's really the individual that is fetishized here. And I'm just showing some examples from how the government deceived us and let us alone from The Last of Us. Where in the upper case, in the beginning in Boston, what does the military do when there's an apocalypse? The military becomes a fascist state. Also, I won't defend the military as a whole, but it's also not the most probable outcome of such a situation. Second level, I'm rushing really through to stay in time as good as it gets. On the aesthetic level, we already talked or we heard about ruins in the last days. And one thing is they're very aesthetic. I was always very interested in ruins, and it attracted me on a level I didn't understand at the beginning. And also, none of these games invented this sort of ruin porn. This is something that always was with us. I'm showing here 3 examples from movies from the 1970s, especially. Normally, I like to ask if you know these movies. We can do that maybe in the questions later. But just to show, this is not an invention of zombie games, but zombie games are really excelling at putting them in front of on the aesthetic level. And we have also sometimes a mise en scène of state buildings showing that the state is crumbling, that the state didn't help. In this case, Buckingham Palace. And this is the capital, not the US capital in Washington, but in Boston of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But what is more important is on the lower left side, it's when our family homes, and especially the US suburban homes, when they are invaded, when there's this sort of home invasion, because this is really the core of our identity that is attacked and deconstructed here. So there's the architectural ruin that, and I won't have the time, but yeah, just take a second, sorry. There's also, this is, as Daniel said yesterday, this is also, it works like a myth because it's not only the sign as showing a building that is no longer here, but for example, there was this big, the crave for ruins in the Romantic, in the German Romantic, but not only, it was also in England and France, but in Germany especially, this is a political art. This is political art that is having a message against the Aufklärung, the Enlightenment, thank you very much, and showing, look, the German history, especially the ruins from the medieval ages, and we are forgetting them. And ruins are a sign that working in a way, they are a warning. And I'm going to jump that because I'm going to talk about the human ruin, which is another core moment of the aesthetics of zombie games. And again, so we have some concept art from Last of Us down there because it's really showing what is important or what differentiates zombies from aliens, orcs, robots, and so on as enemies. They have been human. They have been us. Often they were the mothers of other characters in the games. They were the sons and daughters. But at the end, there's almost no humanity left in them. So it's really there's this moment of dehumanization in this audio visual aesthetic of the zombie. Third part, the game mechanics. I'm going to show some counterexamples because we have so many games. It's not every game is like this, but this is the dominant discourse. So the core moment, the core mechanic moment is conflict. If we talk about zombie games, if we see a zombie game, what we also expect, there is some sort of conflict. There are two ways to adapt to this conflict. The one is what I would call the tank method. So you have the horde is attacking you. You have a BFG, a really big gun, and you have to survive as long as it goes against this horde, like in Left 4 Dead. Or it's more into the direction of stealth and sneak mechanics, like in The Last of Us, where they are just so overwhelming powerful. I'm talking especially about the clickers, where you really don't want an open conflict with them. Core moment here is it's always an overwhelming foe you're opposing here, and you have never the good cards. You're never on the easy side here. Then most of the time there are no mechanics for cooperation. There are no mechanics for rebuilding. There are some examples I'm going to show, and you can't fight the reason. I mean, Joshua talked about the cure, but there is no game where you can find a cure. At least I know no game of where you can find a cure and reverse it, or where you can cure the. Sorry, something personal. What really annoys me, what I would do, I would really try to find a cure, at least to cure the people I knew who became zombies. But these games are telling you, normally if you see a family where someone gets bits, you know what you have to do is kill him at the moment, because in the end he will eat or she will eat everybody else. Yeah, sorry, that's just something that's really annoying to me on a personal level. And also, of course, something that many games have to really put the focus on the individual. So you're deciding, you decide in the end what is good or right, what is good or wrong. We could talk a lot about the hospital scene, but it stays with this. It's the one person, you, that decides what is right or wrong, because there are no laws left. So the myth that comes out for this, very reduced, is cooperation on a bigger level, on a societal level, doesn't work. So the rule by the people is something that deceived us in the beginning, that left us alone, so we can only rely on ourselves. We can maybe have a small group, like one daughter or one person. We take care of a really, really small community somewhere in the woods in Pennsylvania or Nebraska, I don't know where, but we won't rebuild the big cities and try to build a government. On the graphic and audio level, there's the sort of the threats that gets really personal, really close, because it's really about our identity. Our identity is attacked here. And the game mechanics tell us, yes, what we can do. So problem resolution is only conflict, is flee or fight, really on a basal level. I want to show you some counterexamples, because what I often hear is, yes, this is how games work. If you make a zombie game, you can only make it like a fighting or sneaking game. But there are some mechanics for cooperation, and even quite early on in Dead Rising, you had to find the survivors. I mean, maybe it wasn't the most fun part, but I found it interesting that they thought about something quite normal. And then the two State of Decay games, where you also make this on a very small level, but you build a little society, or a little community at least. Look, what I didn't talk too much about it, yeah, but what do we do now with this information? What I want to stress now, so we have this myth that tells us democracy, in fact, or cooperation or the state doesn't work, and it's only the individual you can rely on, so only yourself, which, fun fact, is a core idea of the liberal ideology that is quite a dominant discourse now. So if we play these games, or wait, I'm just going to take the last slide to make it shorter, because I see that I have 1 minute left. To show you an example, I tried, so I'm not the biggest writer, the text is from me, I tried to reduce it on the core ideas of this zombie game. So the flood of others breaks against our walls and fences every day. Without end, more and more strangers stream in and gather the borders of our community. The dams threaten to break, and what happens? Those in power certainly seem overwhelmed. If you take just this without the pictures, sorry, could have made a better slide for the beginning. This not only works for zombie games, and it becomes interesting for us as a myth, because it really got everywhere. It's also the story of Mass Effect. It's also the story of Game of Thrones, if you reduce it to that. Dragon Age, just it's a very common story. This And it was also reproduced in the media when there was the refugee crisis. And we also see, don't have the time to go into depth in this, but they also took really the mise en scène of the photographs. This doesn't mean that we play too many zombie games, and this is why we now vote far-right parties. But there's no causality, no direct causality, but a correlation. Both zombie narratives and the media narrative are part of the same discourse. And also in the zombie narrative, we are negotiating how we react to these things. This doesn't mean that all zombie games are evil, but this means, as some colleagues and Fiona lastly said, if we know about this, then we have the possibility to also build up a new narrative. In fact, what Joshua asked for yesterday is really to open this up. Because if we just say, we want to make another zombie game, we're doing this. And it's okay, but maybe it's more fun also to try to open it up. Thank you.